Um, Welcome everyone to the September 9th quarterly meeting of the Oregon Public Defense Commission's Audit Committee. First item on our agenda is to welcome some new members. Um, uh, David Terry is one of those. He's the Chief Audit Executive for Portland State University. And unfortunately, Jacqueline Moore, another new member, who is the Chief Audit Executive for the Oregon military, is unable to attend today because she's ill and excused. My name is John Hutzler. I'm the chair of the Audit Committee, a member since its inception. I'd like to ask other members of the committee to please introduce themselves to our new member.
I'll go ahead and begin. I'm Scott Martin. I'm the Chief Audit Executive for the Oregon Public Defense Commission, and I've been with the organization since August of 23.
Kim?
Hi, David. I'm Kim Freeman. I am the CAP, which is Compliance Audit Performance Operations Manager. I've been with the agency, will be 2 years next month. And on the committee, don't quote me, but I think for about a year. So, welcome.
Ralph?
Good afternoon, David. My name is Ralph Amador. I am the Budget Finance Manager or Chief Financial Officer, depends on who you talk to. I've been with the agency since September of 2021, I believe. Yeah, about 3 years. And I've been with the committee ever since its inception. Welcome aboard. I got about 20 years of state experience with government, so been around the block a little.
And we're also joined today by the interim executive director of the agency, Ken. Do I have it correct, Sen Chagrin?
Close. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Ken Chagrin. It's just San and Chagrin run together. And I've been with the agency not even 2 months yet, but I'm really excited to sit here, listen, and learn. And I appreciate y'all letting me, hang out this afternoon with you.
Thank you. We're glad to have you here.
Thank you.
And for David's benefit, Kim is Ken's designate to this committee. The audit charter provides that the executive director or his designate is a voting member of the audit committee.
Great. Thanks everyone for those introductions. So happy to join the committee and help out as best I can.
And feel free to add anything you'd like to the brief introduction I gave you, David.
Just the brief introduction for me. David Terry, like John said, I work at Portland State University, leading their internal audit shop. I've been on other state agency audit committees, so Oregon Department of Ed, and then recently was on the HEC audit committee for 5 years. And then other than that, been with the state of Oregon doing internal audit and external audit for the past 20 years.
Thank you. So we're going to skip over the approval of the minutes of the last meeting. Scott, can you provide everyone with the planned schedule for meeting dates for the next year?
Yes. So really, when we began the recording, I think we mentioned this was the September meeting. It's the June meeting, just to correct that real quick.
I'm sorry. Did I say September? Thank you.
No worries. So today we have, of course, June. Next meeting will be September 8th. All of these are from 1 to 3 p.m. Then it'll be December 8th, then March 9th of 26, and then June 8th of 26. I'll note that in the September meeting, we're going to be joined by Steve Bergman he's the Secretary of State's Audits Division Manager, as well as the Deputy Secretary of State, Michael Kaplan, in September. That some of that will be executive session, which is consistent with our charter. But basically the point of that is to get an idea of what the planned scope is for the Secretary of State's audit of the agency sometime in 26, probably earlier, first half of 26. So we'll have an opportunity to talk with them then about that. That's all I have.
Thank you. Any questions? Moving on to Ralph and Kim, and this this may be a place where you folks need to be attentive to the fact that this is a public meeting. So if there's anything in your status update that that might warrant an executive session, please feel free to request one. Could you go ahead with your update on agency update?
Ralph, you want me to go first? Okay, so Kim Freeman for the record. So David, for you and everyone listening, I currently have the data and research team and the policy team. So those are the two areas that I have here for the agency. I think I know I reported at our last meeting that we had recruited for a senior research analyst position, and we did have Dr. Adrian Manriquez join our agency in the middle of March. And so he is getting up to speed with all of the data and all of our databases and working with the current data and research team. And that's currently a team of 3. And then from our policy team, which is a team of 3 and a current admin assistant, we are working on all the policies that we need now that we are in the executive branch. So we have gone through analysis of the DAS, which is the Department of Administrative Services policies that we're required to have, and we have done a cross-reference check. So the policy team is working with other managers and subject matter experts to ensure that if we can just truly adopt the DAS policies, or if we need to make enhancements to policies to fit the Oregon Public Defense Commission's policies here at the agency. All the policies then are created, reviewed by managers, subject matter experts. They're also presented to our executive team for review and approval, and or the commission, depending on the policy. It may need commission approval. So once those are approved, John, you have a question? No. Oh, you just went yellow on my screen, so I just wanted to make sure. And so once they're approved, they're usually signed by our deputy director or our executive director. They're posted, if it's an internal policy, they're posted internally on our SharePoint page. And so we have a page that's for policy and processes, and it's all broken down by what we call divisions and sections. So we have an administrative section, we have a policy section, we have obviously a finance section, an HR section, and so they're all listed within the section, the division and section that they adhere to. We've done a lot of what I call cleanup to ensure that that page is more user-friendly to our internal staff. By section and ease of finding. And then if there's processes that are created with the policies, they're also listed there. And then external policies are on our OPDC website under policy, and they're also broken out by division. So you'll see the executive division, you'll see our trial support and development, And then we probably have one on there for some of our fiscal policies or things that relate to our PAE, which is pre-authorized expense and court mandated expense, any accounts payable billing. So we've broken them out by section and ease, hopefully for our external stakeholders and providers. And then we have our internal page for any internal policies there. We are working on a lot of policies that need in place, but one that we're working on now because it's a mandate by the governor is a customer service policy. So we're working on that right now. Thanks to Ken, who had one at his previous agency. He's given us a lot of guidance because we were creating a policy with lots of other things that we need. We will still need those, but we don't have to have those policies and processes in place before we adopt the overall customer service policy for the agency. There's a lot of work around that and expectations of the governor that we have a lot of these policies in place. So we've done a lot of that work. We've also kind of rearranged the policy team and how we receive a policy request. So we have a tracker now. We also have it if you need a process. And then, David, I'm sure you're familiar with too, since we're in the executive branch, we will need to create Oregon administrative rules. So that's a whole new process for the agency. And so someone who may request a policy may not be sure if we need a rule, an administrative rule. So we have that information, and then the policy team meets with whomever the requester is. So there's a lot of internal work that happens around policy process and then determining if we need an administrative rule. I think that's about it for me. And so I'll turn it over to Ralph.
Turn myself off mute. Hi, David. Again, Ralph Amador here. In my purview, I have the budget, accounting, accounts payable, pre-authorized expenditures, court mandated expenditures, facility, and then forecasting winds its way in there as well. On the budget side, we're in the midst of our budget cycle. We just had our budget hearing today. We got our our preliminary LFO recommendations, and we're currently going through and figuring out what's what and how it's going to play out. We're fielding calls from folks about, everybody wants to know what we got, and it takes a little bit of time to unravel. As you've been in this 20 years, so you've probably seen this a few times. The accounting side is that they're getting ready to do their year-end stuff and their biennial year-end. We've engaged with the Secretary of State on our CAFR audit. So we're working forward through that as we move forward there. Accounts payable, they're currently around 40 days out in paying payables right now. One of the interesting things with our accounts payable unit is that we are up 1,500 invoices per month, more than we were doing a year ago. So it's gone up incrementally. So that pays all the bills. Our pre-authorized expense unit, which is the unit that gets the work requests. So an attorney gets a case, requests some work to be done, goes to the pre-authorized expense unit. They approve the work on the basis of reasonable and necessary, and it goes through a process there so that people can do work to represent people in investigation, mitigation, psychological expenditures, other experts and stuff that really help represent a person in a trial. Or hopefully doesn't get to a trial. They can get some sort of way to some sort of a disposition. Those folks are about 8 days out on approving work requests. Their goals between 7 to 10. So they're right where they need to be. Again, when we get work, we approve work to be done. I think we're 90 days out before we can expect to get an invoice on those. So we're tracking stuff like that. Court mandated expenses is the other group. That's where our attorney bills come. We have hourly attorneys all over the place. We have a thing called the temporary hourly increase program, and we have the unrepresented individuals programs. So that make sure that if you've looked at the news lately, you'll see that we're there pretty frequently, trying to get people representation. That's where a lot of these cases go, paying hourly attorneys in addition to our contracts. Yeah, that's all I can say. That we have facilities. We have 4 facilities right now. We have an office. Actually, we have 6 facilities. Let me make that correction. We have an office in Medford. We have an office in Salem, where we're at here on Commercial Street. We have an office on Court Street where the appellate division sits. We have an office on Interstate Avenue in Portland. We have representation, some office space in the Multnomah County Courthouse. And as of about a week and a half ago, we now have a large office space in the brand new Clackamas County Courthouse. So we're all over the place with facilities, which again is new to us. And we have recruitment out for a facilities manager right now. So if you know anybody, we're looking for a facilities manager too. We also have recruitment out for a fiscal analyst 3. We're down one of those as well. So I think that's about it. That's the couple things that I'm worried about right now. So if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer those questions. But if not, I will hand the reins back over to Mr. Hutzler and Mr. Martin.
Thank you. Ken, I wonder if you might have anything to add about other areas of the agency, or if we could ask you to speak a little bit about your plan to address the unrepresented crisis, which I understand has made the news, but I've not had a chance to read it myself.
Sure, John. I don't think I have too much to add about the agency, some of from the operational perspective, but yeah, certainly from the plans perspective, I presented a 7-point plan focused, I'd say, almost entirely on contractual changes that we can make. I think we're at a really good kind of inflection point because we are moving from one contractual period to another, and so that we can make some necessary changes with what our contractors see. So front and center on that was to provide contractors with greater flexibility to exceed the maximum attorney caseloads so long as they are currently meeting their maximum, and then they feel that they have additional ethical capacity to go over that maximum. And so it'd be a voluntary program, and attorneys who actually went over their maximum would be compensated for that as well. Currently, if folks go over the maximum under the current contractual approach, they actually don't get compensated. So we would hope that we could motivate folks to be under contract as opposed to shift those costs hourly, because we know that under the contracts too, it's also a cheaper way to provide services. So that's kind of the centerpiece. We also want to focus on doing additional data collection on the quality of public defense services that are being provided, both so we can have baselines to communicate the good work that's being done amongst our providers, but then also, especially with relation to the MAC questions that we keep getting around capacity, ensuring that folks who go over capacity, if we just look at their caseload through the life of their case, that they're providing the same quality of representation on the first case they take under the contract, and then the last one, especially if they're exceeding that maximum level. Beyond that, we have the contractual changes that were passed by the commission before I arrived. So back in April, there were a number of provisions that were changed that ranged from they were all kind of in the weeds, but we're thinking about second and subsequent attorneys or cases that are being transferred between attorneys within the same firm, and trying to right size that MAC for them. That's one challenge we've come against with MAC, is that credit is given once the case is assigned, and so what happens if you only work on that case for a few days or even a couple week or two? So that was another one. And then we also focused on our state trial division and early resolution dockets. That might be one of the two kind of pieces that are a little bit farther outside of the contract. Early resolution dockets are handled in some counties by contractors, but then we've also been doing a lot of that work in-house with our state trial division. One of the benefits of doing that is that by handling it within our state trial division, it has a less of an impact on MAC, since we don't use that MAC model internally. Since we employ an open workload model, it doesn't count against them in a sense in the same way. And so we worry sometimes about contractors who take a lot of cases under an early resolution docket that can just churn through their MAC more quickly. And so that could be a challenge, a challenge for folks taking cases under that model. Excuse me. The other two interventions, because I think I'm at 5 now, is the extension of the law school pipeline program that was created in 2024. I was very pleased to see that the legislature is going to continue to support that program in the budget that was passed out of the subcommittee this morning. And so that would be working with the 3 law schools in the state, 4 programs across the 3 law schools to continue to try to train and then really get a pipeline flowing of young new attorneys into the state. They would also handle, right now the estimate is around 1,000 misdemeanor cases themselves. And so it's not really, we shouldn't really think of it as a capacity expansion thing because they still have to have a supervising attorney, but still that's great to have these young students very excited, handling a large number of cases. And then the other one is it's not tied to it directly, but it's another thinking of expanding capacity by growing the field is to work more closely with our nonprofit public defenders to try to provide them with contractual flexibility to hire classes of attorneys. They've found, at least anecdotally, that hiring in these kind of cohort or class models, it breeds a lot of, it brings you in with colleagues that you can lean on as you begin to develop your public defense career. And it works better than just bringing in people as vacancies occur, kind of on an ad hoc basis. And so what they've shown, or at least what has been shown to me, is that folks stay longer, which is something we also need. We need more, and we need people to stay longer. And so those are the items that we identified. I think that the budget that was passed this morning aligns with what we're hoping to do. And now we're moving into that implementation phase. My suggestions are pretty high level, but how do we, what are the actual contractual words that we use? How do we make sure that that's built in adequately and rolled out to folks? And so we have a couple months to do that because we have also, the commission has elected to extend the current contracts through do an extension until September 30th, which will give us time to work out these new contractual terms, have an appropriate kind of amount of time for feedback from the providers, and then get everybody to sign on right there, kind of at the early stage of fall.
The one news report that I saw indicated that that you were reluctant to put timelines on, I guess I forget now whether it was eliminating or reducing the number of unrepresented cases, that backlog. Is there do you have a sense of when you expect to begin to see the impact of these changes? When that trend might start down?
Sure. Yeah, I think it's we shouldn't necessarily look at them as a package. They have different starting points. So the early resolution dockets have started now, and I think we're already starting to see some positive impacts in Jackson County from the early resolution dockets and from the trial division being there together. If you look at their data has been trending downward. I think we've plateaued and begun to see a reduction, I believe, in Coos County, again, where we have some of those dockets. We currently have one of our Marion County trial team members who is also cited down there at the moment to provide extra capacity. And so when we look at the things that we're starting right now, I think that they're already starting to pay dividends. But as a data analyst, I'm always very cautious. Whenever I see a few data points that look positive, I'm still waiting to see if that trend is sustained, because we've seen, it's been seesawing for quite a while. But if the overall trend is downward, then that makes me happy. The contractual changes, however, because of the extension, really the earliest they could begin to take hold at all would be that early fall period. But I think that also, since we would be thinking about folks going over MAC from the outset, my hope is that we'd be able to see some returns relatively quickly. And then, yes, much has been made of my refusal to include a date. But one of my hopes is that as we begin to build in these new terms, I mean, that's part of it, is some of these changes were agreed upon by the commission like a week before. And so the expectation that we get together and we think about what the voluntary uptake, rate of the 15% overage, it would be assumptions built on assumptions. But as we begin to see what's built into the contracts, I'm hoping to work with the data folks in Kim's office to come up with some different ways to track. And then we might be able to, when we're getting into early fall, have a better idea of when we begin to see that downward trend and kind of prognosticate forward, would be my hope.
Have you had any feedback from providers in the course of developing these proposals of what sort of impact they would expect from those? I mean, in terms of the capacity beyond their contract that they may have,
Sure.
and their prospects for being able to add new attorneys if rates change and things like that.
Right. A lot of the suggestions came from the community, and so I think the feedback so far has been pretty positive. Certainly the hiring of cohorts, that was something that was brought to me by folks in the nonprofit world, and and they were able to state that if they had greater planning flexibility, they could have brought on, and it's in the report, I just forget off the top of my head, it would have been a handful of additional attorneys during this contract cycle, which certainly at this point we need capacity wherever we can get it. And so I think that would bring a positive return, certainly even based on some of the testimony that was provided in the Jackson County on-site meeting that we had in April. There are providers out there, and I've heard this since even before I started at OPDC, who are willing to do more. That they think that some folks are at their ethical max, some folks could continue to take more cases, and so that's why developing a voluntary program that would allow them to do so, still with some guardrails, was one of the first things that I wanted to include. And then also the agency provided some estimates on the potential impact of the other contracting changes, again, which are in the body of the document. It would be a little bullish to think that we could get 30 MAC MAC equivalent out of those other contractual changes, but I think that would be the maximum effect that was calculated by the data team for those. But still, I'd be cautious to think we could get that high right at the outset. And so I think that the feedback overall has been positive that I've received so far, and I do think that we have some good estimates of how they could fit together. But right now, it's still a puzzle where all the pieces don't quite fit perfectly. That's what we're hoping to do to get that better estimate moving forward.
That's certainly understandable.
Yeah.
And if I could, with one last question, I know that the governor gave you a deadline for developing this plan, but does she have a date in mind by which she expects this crisis to be solved?
There's been no specific date communicated to me, like no deadline that's been provided.
At the moment, everybody's hoping at least for progress.
I think that's what everybody's hoping to see is to see, if we can begin, just like you mentioned at the beginning of your questions, if we can see the curve beginning to bend, I think that'll make everybody instantly start to feel a lot better, even if we're not out of the woods.
Yeah. Thanks very much. Appreciate it.
Of course. Thank you. Happy to answer your questions.
Anybody else have questions in regard to the agency status or the plan? Okay. Now, moving on, I think Scott, you can inform us about the status of the annual risk assessment without a quorum.
This is just a quick update. The risk assessment, I've gathered, I think now 28 survey respondents across the agency to give different perspectives of risk. All that information I have, and I'm going to start working on gathering that, quantifying that for management discussions and to prepare the audit plan for the next 3 years. So that'll happen after the PAE and CME audit is completed. As far as writing that up, that's what I'm working on this week. So that effort begins in another week or two. And that'll involve the audit plan afterwards. So,
and again, for the benefit of our new members, that 3-year audit plan is something which is developed and approved by the audit committee annually. So, although it's a 3-year plan, it doesn't lock Scott into a particular plan for 3 years because it gets reviewed the following years. It just gives us a 3-year planning horizon, which is subject to revision each year. All right.
And risks, like to your note, risks change, and that allows us to change the plan.
Right. Any questions? Okay. So moving on, Scott, review the implementation status of prior audit recommendations.
Okay. I'm going to share my
I'm sorry, Scott, was there a report on this in the materials?
no, I'm going to just bring up what
Okay.
I have, do a
All
share
right,
screen.
thanks.
You bet. Okay, can you see this one? With the cursor on it?
Not yet.
Okay, just a second. How about now?
Yes.
Okay, you can see this. All right. So what you have on this is each tab has a different audit. So if we go to the far left, this was one done back in 22. It's all done. You can see those items are closed. So moving across, I'm going now to the internal audit of sole source. Their status is open. There's one closed there, but mostly they're open. And if we go over to the right, and we have a status of when the next status update is due. So there's two things to note here on this: who owns it, and when's the status update due. And we could get into the details on what it is, but I just really today want to get familiar with this and then just show what our status is generally. And certainly if there's questions, I can drill down more on any of these recommendations. This one comes from an internal audit that was done, I think by Latham Stack, and the owner for the first, I think for all 5 of these, is Jana. I've talked with her and we agreed that February of next year is an appropriate time to revisit this for the status at that point. That's because things are happening that can progress to that point where she can then decide, okay, our implementation looks like it's at some point in the future. So that's what this is showing now. Any questions on this particular audit?
Scott, in regard to the nature of the report and its maximizing its utility to members of the committee, I think it would be helpful if you could include a column with the original date that management indicated it intended to implement a response, and also a column that indicates how long a recommendation has been open. So that would be, from today's date back, how many days since the report was issued.
Great. That's in column D and column. So in this case, these were issued on.
Oh, yes, I see. Thank you. In column E. Yeah, that's days open. I see. Thank you.
Yep. I'll add to that also, as I do these, I've built this chart. So this shows where we were back in March. And as we progress, these are the outstanding number of audit recommendations we have now, currently 29, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
Let's just double check that. 28.
Okay.
Okay, moving on to the current Stokes audit. We have a number here that are open. I've had discussions with the owners of different audit recommendations, and they've given updates. So you see over here for the first one, David and Jana own this first one, and that's going to be due for an update in January. And I move down, there's several owned by Ralph, and we're going to touch base later this week, get an update there. I know he's been busy, so there's not a crisis there. We're just going to touch base real soon on those. Same with Steve. We had it planned for May 28th, but I know he's been real busy. I keep my notes in here so you can see the different times that I've made contact and reached out. But again, I know they're busy. I've touched base with Amy. Got an update due from her in July. And then the same with Ralph, another one on the 28th. And as we progress down, I recently closed one as of June 3rd. And then the remaining items, looks like July. We got a November, another November, and that's it. So it's really just a process of keeping track of those and finding out what's happening and staying on top of their statuses. And these have been open for over 1,000 days. So this is stuff that I think now that we've got staff and we've got policies and there's effort being made on FCMS, for example, contracts are being reviewed for procurement. Action is now happening on these fronts. Any questions? Oh, okay. Going to move on to CAP. We have 2 audit recommendations here. These are owned by Emishay and also Steve. I've been in contact with both. I'll get an update from them later this week. These have been open for 346 days. And I think there's some concerns around just the CAP structure, and I know there's been a lot of work on that. So we'll get an update later, probably in about a week on this one. Any questions here? And then moving to the spots card. This is 346 days. Updates are due in October. And then there's a few, I think 3, where Ralph and I are going to touch base later this week and get a status update on those. And that is where we are with our 28 outstanding audit recommendations at this point. Any questions?
Yeah, how many have been closed?
Just a handful. There hasn't been a lot of progress on these audit recommendations over the 2.5 years that they've existed, to be frank. If I go to the beginning, those were closed, but there were only, I think, 4, and that was for a very narrow audit about the internal auditors or the prior executive director's expenses done by the internal audit.
Items, as I recall. Yeah.
Right. And I checked in on that to see if I need to do that. And I've touched base with Secretary of State and also with DAS, and they said there isn't a need to do it for Jessica's departure.
Good. Yeah, that can be quite a strain on a small audit shop, especially if there are a lot of changes in directors. Okay. Any questions?
Chair, I would like to just note for the record, true, there aren't a lot of closures on some of these, but there is a lot of work that's been happening, right? We've adopted the Oregon procurement policies and manuals that have to do with some of the Kernan Stokes outstanding items. And it's just because we have a new procurement department. So Jana Hart is our designated procurement officer. So there's some implementation things that need to happen there to show that we're doing that work. And Scott, correct me if I'm wrong, but I guess I don't want it to seem like we have not been doing anything on these outstanding audit items. We're working on making sure we've got policies in place, making sure the right owners, because we have had staff not in the positions to do some of this work. And now we actually have people, staff in these roles. We have 2 new managers, Steve Arndt, who's the new manager for the trial support and development team. And then Amy Shabert is over the compliance part, and her team will be the contract administrators for contracts. So there's a lot of kind of work that's happening over the last couple of months. So I just want to make sure that that's not missed in this report, because it doesn't show closed, but there is work that's happening.
No, I think it's important to recognize that, and also to recognize that, I mean, particularly in regard to some of those recommendations that have been open for 1,000 days. I mean, those audits and recommendations were made when the agency was a part of the judicial branch. So, in addition to addressing those recommendations, you also have to deal with the fact that how you address them may be different under the executive branch than it would have been under the judicial.
True.
So,
And Ralph and Scott and I do have quarterly meetings to go over all of these as a group. So we actually had one in June, so May. We had one in May. And so we have them scheduled out, I believe, through the end of the year as well.
And just to confirm that management still does intend to implement each of these recommendations that are open, because the other way to close a recommendation is for management is if management says we've done all we can or want or intend to do on this recommendation, and even if it hasn't been fully implemented, it's time to close it. And it could be, it could be closed in that way as perhaps partially implemented. So the reason to keep recommendations open is because management intends to do more to implement a recommendation.
That's a good point. And I'll add to that, that when they do that, they own the risk, right? They would be saying, I've done enough and we're happy with where we are, post whatever actions have been taken.
Yep.
Thank you,
John,
John and Scott. I would just say in the short time I've been here, we have not delved into these deeply yet. And so if nothing else, I would commit to keeping them open or to resolve them the way that you just mentioned. But I would like to have more discussions with Scott and then with internal staff just to see where those have been. Clearly, some of these have some real history to them. And so I want to make sure that that's fully understood before committing either way. So there's my non-answer answer. I apologize for that.
No, that makes a lot of sense. Thank you, Ken.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions on the status of audit recommendations? All right, thank you. Moving on to the CAE disclosure document. I believe that was in our packet. The one that was titled FOAR 125-700 report.
I think the disclosures is the one titled 2025 AC Charter Required Disclosures Report.
Oh, thank you. Yep.
Okay. I'm going to share my screen real quick. Okay, let me know if you can see that report. Nothing yet? Okay, how about now?
Here comes.
Can you see it now?
Yes.
Excellent, thank you. Okay, so in the charter, the audit committee charter, the audit committee is to receive a report from the chief audit executive on ethics. And so when I look at the new IIA standards, domain 2, principles 1 through 5 speak to ethics. And so that's what you're seeing in front of you is a detailed list of principles 1 through 5 and domain 2 of the new IIA standards. And I just want to go through those real quick, and I can highlight what they are and their status. And is there any questions so far? Did that make sense? Because I went through that kind of quick. No, okay. So the first is demonstrate integrity. It talks about 3 different components: honesty and professional courage, organizational ethical expectations, legal and ethical behavior. And I'm asserting that that is compliant for that principle. Principle 2, maintain objectivity. Individual objectivity is the first standard, 2.1. Safeguarding objectivity. This has to do with internal auditors must recognize and avoid or mitigate actual, potential, or perceived impairment to objectivity. And then the third, standard 2.3, disclosing impairment to objectivity. If objectivity is impaired in fact or in appearance, the details of the impairment must be disclosed promptly to the appropriate parties. That would be to my audit committee as a first place that I would go. I believe that is compliant. Demonstrate competency. First standard here, 3.1. Internal auditors must possess and obtain the competencies to perform their work. Just abbreviating real quick. I've earned my internal audit practitioner designation. That is now a permanent designation. So that is subject to being renewed. Every year I have to complete certain learning education credits. Standard 3.2, same thing, continuing professional development. That's being done, so I'm asserting that this is compliant. Principle 4, exercise due professional care. Conformance with the standards is the first one, standard 4.1. And standard 4.2, due professional care. Internal auditors must exercise due professional care by assessing the nature, circumstances, and requirements of the services to be provided. This goes through the different components of that. And then standard 4.3, professional skepticism. That's not taking things at face value and actually asking that question that's probably a little bit annoying at times, but being skeptical of what you hear, challenging it, looking for documentation, and following up. I believe I'm compliant with that. Principle 5, maintaining confidentiality. That's the use of information that internal auditors get. They follow the relevant policies, procedures, laws, and regulations when using that information. So while I have access to information, I'm still bound by its protection and the requirements of having access to it. And then standard 5.2, protecting information. Like I just mentioned, when you have it, you need to protect it. You're subject to those protections. I'm asserting that that's compliant. And that takes care of ethics as far as that part of the standards. I've also added standard 7.1, which has to do being positioned independently. And I'm asserting that 7.1 is compliant. And let's see, I'm going to say, yeah, that's compliant. And then compliance with the auditing standards. I'm gaining familiarity with the 2024 auditing standards. Many of my peers are as well. This is a year where we're in transition and we're checking with each other to learn, hey, how did you meet that requirement with your audit shop? How do you perform that external quality assessment? What kinds of things matter? So we're all kind of learning that together, and I'm part of a group that's doing that. It's the Chief Audit Executive Council. We meet every month and we have those kinds of discussions. So in that effort, I think we're compliant and getting up to speed on the audit standards. And so my requested action is that
actually, I think we talked about this. You don't really need action from the committee on this.
okay.
If you did, we'd have to be addressing this with a quorum. This is just for the committee's information.
Just so you know, right? Certainly, any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
I have one question, and it may come up in a I don't know whether it's the next or a subsequent agenda item, but are these is compliance with these a part of your management questionnaire? Do you ask management whether you conducted your work professionally, encompassing these sorts of things?
It's a component of that, certainly.
Yeah.
The survey being issued at my request, and probably a few months we'll talk about that. I want that feedback. I want to make sure I'm delivering on these standards.
Yeah. Okay. Anyone else have questions? All right. Thank you, Scott.
Thank you.
Next was the OAR compliance report. And my recollection, I know it says some approve on here, but my recollection is that this is a report which is actually due to DAS in September. Is that correct?
It's part of what's submitted to them in September. It'll actually be in the August timeframe, I believe. Yes. I need to be able to state that I've done these things and where I'm at as part of their questionnaire. There are other questions as well, but this is a big part of it.
My question is this something which requires audit committee approval and therefore we'd need a quorum, or is it something that does not require approval? That's just an obligation of the CAE to report to DAS and is being provided as information to the committee?
It is the latter.
Okay. So with that modification to the presenter column, that this is just for information, why don't you go ahead and present that report?
And I'll comment that it was originally conceived of as requiring an approval for the process, but agreed. At this point, this is for your information. And I'll bring up opportunities for questions so that we can all clarify that. But at the end, I'll have the support by saying I've shared this with the audit committee and there was no objection to this information as presented. Okay, so what this is a review of the Oregon administrative rules specific to internal audit. And I'll start off with 125-700, 125. This has to do with internal audit requirements for agencies that have 2 or more of the criteria. They list them and we're compliant with that. That's really not a big issue, but basically that's the criteria for having internal auditors. The next one, for agencies that meet the requirement of this OAR, the internal audit function shall be staffed with a minimum of 1 FTE. This position shall be budgeted and maintained at the chief audit executive level. Subsequent FTE may be budgeted at lower positions and reports to the CAE. The status of this is let's see, OPDC internal audit function is staffed at the minimum of 1, that's myself, but it is not budgeted and maintained at the chief audit executive level. It's at internal audit 3. This will be a discussion point with the director and myself. I think we're looking at June 16th. We'll have a one-on-one. This said the 13th, it's moved. So we'll discuss that then. Just a heads up, because that wouldn't be compliant necessarily. I don't perceive that it's compliant with that portion of rule. Moving on. Any questions on that?
Just you'll be reporting back to this committee at the next meeting on.
Exactly. That's all it is. The next one is.
I have a question on 125-700, 125.
Yes.
It says that we're supposed to be shall establish, maintain, or two of the 4, right?
Of the
In 1,
agencies required to have an internal audit function, you mean?
yeah, internal auditing requirements.
Yeah.
It says agency that meet 2 or more of the following criteria for the last 2 consecutive bienniums, so establish and maintain. We have biennial expenditures that exceed 200 million for the last 2 bienniums.
Mhm.
We do not have more than 400 employees. We do not have any cash revenue. And we are not 50% other funds or federal funds. So we really only meet one of these criteria. So when you say that we're compliant, my question is we don't even meet the requirements of the internal audit because we only meet one of these here. That's I was a little bit confused on that.
Okay. I'm operating under the assumption that we did.
No.
Okay.
Yeah, we don't. We only meet A. We don't meet any of the other 3.
Good point. Thank you. All right. Well, that will be a discussion point then with the director and with the audit chair separately. I'll review that. Thank you for bringing that up, Ralph. I appreciate it. All right. Moving on to 0135, internal audit functional governance. This speaks to how the internal audit function is governed, either yellow book or red book. We follow the internal Institute of Internal Auditors, which is the red book. And I'm just saying we're compliant with that. We're following those standards. Section 2, agency management shall take reasonable steps necessary to support the internal audit function in complying with selected professional audit standards. This may include obtaining audit-related certifications, continuing professional education, and membership to professional auditing associations. The agency does support a membership in the IIA, but has not necessarily supported the ongoing training. Ralph and I have talked about that a little bit. It really comes down to sort of what do we have as a budget, what's available. But I do want to point out that the standards in the Red Book, standard 3.2, requires internal auditors must maintain and continually develop their competencies to improve the effectiveness and quality of internal audit services. Internal auditors must pursue continuing professional education, including education and training. And then 10.1 speaks to a budget. The chief audit executive must manage the internal audit function's financial resources. The CAE must develop a budget that enables the successful implementation of internal audit strategy and achievement of the plan. The budget includes the resources necessary for the function's operation, including training and acquisition of technology and tools. The CAE must manage the day-to-day activities of the internal audit function effectively and efficiently in alignment with the budget. In addition, the CAE must seek budget approval from the board. And so there isn't a budget there that I'm responsible for, so I'm not sure how to be compliant with that particular section of this standard. And I'm going to bring that up then with the director and strategize how that can be. Just a heads up. Any questions on that? Okay. All right. Yes, sir.
Myself again. So, when I read the definitions, 125-700-015, I read the definition of the chief audit executive. It says the top position responsible for activities. This seems to point as though there is a team of auditors, where we're doing a whole bunch of stuff like that. There is just one function, one person, that does this. So I mean, I understand what you're trying to get at here, but there just isn't a big budget to manage. There's just one person to do some internal audits for us right here. There's not, I mean, if we had, because I've worked in other agencies that have big budget shops, and they have, you know, groups of 10 people with them, and yes, it's the responsibility of that manager to manage the staff, manage the resources, and everything else. Make sure everybody's training. But again, we're just talking about one person here, and we haven't sectioned it off as its own division. So
Yeah, Ralph, if I could address that, I think
sure.
I think the issue here in the standards is not so much in regard to I don't know what you might characterize as job description,
Sure.
as it is independence, the independence of the audit function, so that the person in charge of the audit function has the authority to make independent decisions in regard to expenditures of internal audit resources.
I do understand that, but the internal audit resources are, I mean, just reporting to work and doing the job with their, and I mean, the only thing that's been requested is that because it's not a managerial position, that you have to seek, and myself, even as a manager, I have to seek approval from my boss for training. I don't get to just pick whatever training and go do it and purchase it and buy it and then seek reimbursement for it. I have to create a training plan with my boss and say, this is what I'd like to do. And then I go forward and do that. That's for any manager responsibility. I don't read anywhere in here where it says that internal audit is separate and above, outside of the normal functions of the agency, saying that they can have their money and spend it however they want and buy whatever they want without any repercussions or any checks and balances. So again, I do understand the position, I understand responsibility, and I do understand checks and balances, but we can't operate that way. If there is an established process for doing that, and I believe that the auditor has discussed it with the previous executive director about the process of requesting training, getting training done, and how it's applicable for doing that. You know, and when it's necessary, vis-a-vis the position, the level of the position necessary for the agency to operate at. I know that we're saying that we need to have a chief audit executive. And I understand that for agencies that meet that threshold, we may need a chief audit executive, but we don't meet that threshold. We're below that threshold of needing a chief audit executive. We were just given the luxury of giving audit positions to do some internal audits. Now we're trying to apply a framework to something that doesn't even necessarily have to exist at this moment. So that's, I mean, I'm not saying negative to anything. I'm just trying to get clarification on what's the goal, the end goal for these discussions.
Yeah,
and I think knowing that they've already been had with the previous executive director, with HR and everybody else. So,
Well, I mean, my experience as a chief audit executive has been that that as the budget is being prepared, I submitted a budget request that included, for example, an item for professional development and training, which referenced the number of hours of professional training that are required to maintain your professional certification and the average cost of those hours. And once that was approved, it was up to me as the chief audit executive to decide what training I would seek within those budget limits. If I felt I needed training in a particular area because I was anticipating an audit that required some expertise in that area, I could make that choice. I didn't have to have that choice approved once the budget amount had been approved.
Sure.
And that's what I mean by independence here. That the decision in regard to particular training needs is up to the auditor. Management can't say, well, I know you're going to be auditing in this area of our information systems, for example, but we're not going to approve training for information systems auditing.
Yeah, and we would never do that. I mean,
No,
that would be disingenuous.
But that's the point.
Yeah.
That's the point of it. But to your point, Ralph, though, it does say take reasonable steps necessary. So I certainly recognize that, right? Like it's got to be reasonable. It can't be kind of crazy. So within a budget that is reasonable. So just bringing that up. And I'll also add, I've compared with peers. Typically, the internal audit position for a CAE is a management position, non-supervisory. So I'll share that with the director when we meet, but certainly I appreciate all the input. And that's a good point. It's a good point.
I think David has a question.
David.
Just mostly a comment. So I agree with John's statements that with the CAE rule and the standards we have to follow, where you have to get continuing professional education if you're going to comply with the IIE standards. Just getting that budgetary resource, it's not trying to usurp agency controls. It's just there so it reduces an obstacle in order to comply with the standards. Now, like at PSU, we have our own designated budget for internal audit, but I still have to follow the normal control processes to request approval for expenditure, to go to training, and then there's someone reviewing and approving that request. So I think the overall goal is just to get in alignment with the standards and the best practices. That's kind of what I'm hearing from this discussion.
Yeah. Trying to find the solution to where the standards are being followed, and exactly right.
Okay, let's move on.
Okay. Let's see, section 3 of this is rule 135. Scroll down here. The internal audit charter shall formally define the internal audit function purposefully, with authority and responsibility, and the professional auditing standards that will apply. Basically, that is done. We have an internal audit charter. It is separate from the audit committee charter. That is due for a review and update in the next year or so. Let's do that after we've done the audit committee charter. We're still working through that. When that's done, we'll take a breath and then probably start looking at the internal audit charter as a second item. Item 4, internal audit staff shall have unrestricted access to all systems, processes, operations, function, data, personnel, and activities as needed to perform job responsibilities. The as needed is the phrase there, and I call that compliant. I've been able to get to where I need to go to get the information I need. Section 5, each agency having an internal audit function shall establish and maintain an audit committee. Talks about having an audit committee charter, at least one qualified external member. We have that. Item C, if the agency is a governing body or a commission, the audit committee must include at least one board or commission member. We have that. And item D, the audit committee shall approve the risk-based internal audit plan that's being composed after the risk assessment's completed. And it'll be the responsibility of the audit committee to approve it. That's being done as well. So I'm saying that's compliant. Moving on to 140. Each agency CIE shall prepare an agency-wide risk assessment. Again, that's being done soon after this audit is completed. The inputs have already been gathered. So that is compliant. Section 2, the CIE shall prepare an audit plan of engagement based on the most recent risk assessment that will follow the risk assessment. So that is compliant. Each agency CIE shall identify an audit topic related to governance and risk management at least once every 5 years. That's planned. And we can say even in that regard, the CAP audit would be one that would probably cover that particular requirement. So I'm going to say that is compliant. Let's go. Section 4. The CIE shall provide information on the activities performed by the internal audit function governing the time period between July 1st through June 30th of the preceding year to the Oregon Department of Administrative Services. And this shows the content of that. That has been done and is being done. So that is compliant. Section 5. The CIE must periodically assess whether the purpose, authority, and responsibilities defined in the audit charter and resources required to accomplish the work continue to be adequate. That is in part why the audit committee charter is being revised. It's being looked at and updated and kept current. So that is compliant. And Section 6, completed risk assessments and internal audits need to be filed with the Audits Division of the Office of the Secretary of State. Prior audits and risk assessments have been filed with them. So that is compliant. Section 145, external review. The agency internal audit function must have an external assessment to determine whether the function is operating in accordance with the professional standards. The frequency of external assessments are predefined by professional auditing standards. I believe that's once every 5 years. And I'm participating in what they call a QAE at the end of right in the fall timeframe, close to the end of the year. So I'll be learning those skills while we evaluate another agency. And so the following year or later, we will have that same assessment of our internal audit function. So that's happening. That's part of the new standards and getting up to speed with what's required. So for now, that is compliant. Section 2, a copy of the external assessment report will be provided to the audit committee. When we have one, we will share it with the internal audit committee as well as DAS. So we don't have one yet, so that is compliant. And part 3, internal audit functions may have the assessment performed by either of the following means. So this is where it's talking about how those assessments are done. Typically, we'll coordinate through DAS. That's item A, so 3A. That's what I'll be participating in and will likely be subject to next year or the year after. So that is compliant. Moving on to section 150. Internal audit independence. In order to maximize both independent and objectivity of the audit function and allow the internal audit function to fulfill its responsibilities, the CIE must report functionally to the audit committee and administratively to the agency director, deputy director, or equivalent. That's the dual reporting nature of the position. That is being done. Functionally, I report to the audit committee, to the chair, and then administratively, I report to Ken. That is compliant. Section 2. The chief audit executive must have unrestricted access to decision makers, decision-making bodies, and the information employees needed to perform internal audit duties and responsibilities. The CIE may not defer ultimate judgment on audit matters to others and must be free to obtain advice and information from sources inside and outside the agency. To be effective in their role, the chief audit executive should be a non-voting member of the agency's senior management team and attend executive leadership team meetings. This is something I'll talk with Ken about in our discussion on, I think, June 16th. I've attended a few before, but with Jessica, we made an alternative arrangement where about every 2 weeks I would meet with her personally. So I'll talk with Ken and decide what he would prefer in support of the agency, if that's good, or if he'd like me at those meetings, it'll be his decision.
And just for reference, Ken, initially when the audit function was established, the Latham Stack, who was the first auditor, did meet regularly with the executive leadership team as a non-voting member. And at some point in Jessica's tenure, she decided to do things differently. I think we're hoping we could get back to that.
John,
Yes.
I think if we're gonna mention that, we need to make mention that there were some lines crossed by the auditors at that time. And there were some things that the chief executive auditor and took upon themselves to do certain things and take certain positions and stances that were outside the realm of what their responsibilities were, including deciding to give the agency a tooth cleaning, or which basically it was a way for them to chastise the agency for what he thought was being wrong to certain people. So I think that's what led to the separation of the internal auditor being taken off of the executive team. He was taking the information that was supposed to be at the executive team and not shared was being shared and outside there. It was felt that way. So that was just, it was a way to create a separation to make sure that all people were taken care of.
So would you agree that that was an issue with the previous
Yes,
internal audit?
I do agree that, and it just never came back.
It's not
The
really
trust never
relevant
came
to
back.
the conversation to be had with Ken about.
No, but I just wanted to make
situation.
sure that
Yeah,
it wasn't
no.
just
I
Jessica
understand.
woke
Thank
up
you.
one day and said, I don't want this to happen.
Yeah.
There's a bunch of stuff that transpired because of that. They
Yeah.
just want to give the whole story.
Thank you. Go ahead, Scott.
I think Kim has her hand up.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No worries.
It's okay.
I'm not
I
able
just
to,
wanted to
I'm not
mention
able to
that,
see everybody's image
no problem.
on my screen here. So feel free to do more than wave, because I may not see a wave.
I'll put my hand down in a minute, but I just also want to acknowledge that Scott is on the managers meeting
Right.
invite, and we do meet once a month, all the managers of the agency. He's on all the communications and he does attend those meetings. I know this conversation's been around senior management, but he does attend the managers meeting. So I just want that on the record as well.
Exactly. In fact, there's a meeting tomorrow. So thank you. All right.
Any other questions or comments before we move on? Okay, go ahead, Scott.
Okay, so part 3, the internal audit function must be free from interference in determining the scope of internal auditing, performance work, and communicating results. The chief audit executive must disclose such interference to the audit committee and discuss the implications. No issues there. That's compliant. Section 4, internal audit function must be free from any operational and management responsibilities that would impair its ability to make independent reviews of all aspects of the agency's operation. I'll read what I've written here. The CAE has not performed any operational or management responsibilities. However, the position description of the OPDC internal auditor includes the duties of the agency's ethics officer and development of agency policies. Performance of such responsibilities would impair IA's ability to make independent reviews of these areas specifically of the agency's operation. This responsibility should be removed from the internal auditor's position description. You can keep it in, but then there has to be some framework to protect it and maintain objectivity if it were to be reviewed. But typically, that's a function that needs to be taken out of the position description. This is something that I'll be talking with Ken about on the 16th. Any questions on that?
Yeah, can anybody provide me with the date of the current position description? And when was that developed?
I can pull what I have, but also just share what I received when I came on board was not a position description, but it was a something different, like a scoping document, a classification description. So I can share with you what I have.
Yeah. Okay.
I would also reach out to HR. I would assume HR, I mean, most all other positions have a position description and each employee is to sign them.
Yeah.
I'm sure that everyone.
I'm curious actually whether it's a position description that might have been developed under the judicial department and may need to be revised in light of DAS rules regarding the internal audit function.
It's entirely possible. And
Yeah.
of course, I've already talked with HR and received a copy of it after I asked about it. It was about a year after I started. It's okay. I think you're right. I think it was probably developed under OJD and just needs to be reviewed and updated. That's all this is.
Thanks.
Okay. Item 6, including resource, scope limitation, including resource limitations placed upon the internal audit function that precludes it from meeting objectives must be communicated in writing to the audit committee and, if applicable, agency management along with its potential effect. I have not encountered that, so that is compliant. Section 155, the agency's internal audit function must maintain audit work papers and reports in accordance with records retention policy. I'm just jumping ahead a little bit. I'm maintaining them per the rule 166-300-0025. And I believe that states it's 10 years, if I remember correctly, for the retention of documents. So that is compliant. And then the agency chief audit executive must follow appropriate data classification procedures to monitor and control confidentiality of sensitive internal audit documents. And it speaks to the statute. That's 192-496 and 192-505. And that's what I'm following to maintain compliance with that rule. That is the end of my report on where we stand with the rules. Any questions?
Yeah, I just think we probably need to delete the requested action and just leave it that you're going to be talking with Ken about these
Fair
things.
enough.
And
Right.
we'll inform the committee. We don't need to take action at this point.
Understood.
Any questions? All right. Let's see where we stand. The internal audit management survey draft. Again, this is something which doesn't require committee approval, but you would invite committee input.
Exactly. So I could share my screen and go
Mara?
through it.
Oh, Mara gone?
I'm here.
Oh, Mara. So is that something we can do? Just, discuss and offer input on this, but not approve it?
Yes, correct. You can discuss. It just
Yeah.
can't be an action item
All right.
without a
Thank you.
quorum.
Although I think we may have a quorum now. Rob has joined us.
Oh, hi. Welcome, Rob. Before we proceed, we're joined today by David Terry, the Chief Audit Executive from Portland State, who's a new member, and our other new member, Jacqueline Moore, is ill and not able to attend. Please introduce yourself to David and tell him a little bit about yourself.
Hi, David. Nice to meet you virtually, at least. And sorry, everyone, I was late. I had another meeting scheduled that had an overlap, and it ran a little bit longer than I anticipated. I've been a long-term attorney, recently retired about a year and a half ago. Did a lot of public defense, did a lot of public defense consortia work, management work, and then established leadership for the private bar a few years back. And once I retired, I was appointed to the commission to be a subject matter expert for the seat that's reserved for a subject matter expert who has experience in public defense. So yeah, nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you, Rob. Thanks for that background.
And Rob also currently serves on the Hillsborough City Council, so he has experience with public meetings as well.
Yeah, that's where I was. Our mayor was unable to make the mayor's meeting this month, and so I filled in.
We're currently, Rob, on the item on our agenda, which was scheduled to be down the bottom of the first page.
Yeah, which one, John? What time?
Approval of the management survey draft. The annual management survey draft discussion.
Oh, audit plan status, internal SharePoint, internal audit. Okay, all right.
Okay.
Yep.
And Scott was just about to tell us about his plans for a management survey.
Right, I can share this screen if it's easier for people. Any preferences at all?
I opened the document so I can.
Okay, I'm just
see
gonna
it on
assume
my
it was part of the
screen.
meeting materials, and so it's right there. This is just a draft survey. Like you mentioned earlier, it follows some of the guidelines in the standards. And it's really, the intent here is for me to get feedback after the next audit's done, the risk assessment is done, and an audit plan is done. You really at that point can see sort of what's done. Is it giving value and benefit to the organization or not? This is an opportunity for feedback for me for both my own growth and then to pinpoint areas that maybe can be improved for the agency and my following of the standards and rules. So,
And to provide feedback to the audit committee on
that too.
On management's perceptions of the audit function. And I'm sorry, I thought, was this a document, a draft that was a part of the packet?
It is. I believe this was sent out in the meeting materials.
Okay, thank you.
And there's no rush on this. I plan on getting this out again. It'd be a couple of months. So if you look at this and say, I really want something else added, please send it to me. I'll add it in. Really welcome that feedback.
Thank
That's
you.
all I have on this.
Moving on, the 2024 audit plan status.
Okay, just a second.
Oops. We did. We missed an item, which is here for inform and discussion, and is a very important one. And that's the audit committee charter status update.
Right.
I'm sorry, I skipped over that, but I'm glad that we're getting to it once Rob is here.
I thought you did that purposefully.
No, I didn't. Sorry.
And I would just mention, while we've got Rob, we could do the meeting minutes to lock that out. That takes an approval, or we can do it later. It's up to you.
Yeah, no, let's go ahead and take.
Well,
Take
we
care of the
lost
meeting.
Ralph, so we don't have a quorum.
No, I'm here.
No,
Oh, you said
Ralph.
Ralph. She said
Oh, Ralph.
Ralph.
Oh,
Yeah, he put in the chat, he had to leave at 2:30.
Okay. Well then, let's go to the audit committee charter status. So we've been conducting a review of the audit committee charter since the previous executive director went to the Department of Justice to ask for, an early draft of a revision of the charter was sent to the Department of Justice for review. And one of their comments was that that charter would subject the audit committee to the public meetings law. Both management and the commission, or at least the governance subcommittee of the commission, indicated a preference for the audit committee to be able to meet without being subject to the public meetings law. And we made additional revisions to the draft in an attempt to satisfy the interests of those parties and of the committee itself to be able to conduct meetings without them being open to the public, because of the nature of material that's often discussed in audit committee meetings involving agency risks and audit recommendations for how to address them and so forth. The revisions have tried to make clear that the audit committee is not a governing body, that the audit committee does not advise a governing body. It does not advise the commission. It advises the auditor, and the auditor makes recommendations to the executive director as a result of his audit work. We sent a revised draft of the charter to the Oregon Government Ethics Committee, which has been granted the authority to apply and administer the public meetings law, and requested an opinion from staff there. I got an opinion from an investigator at OGEC, saying that they felt that the charter as drafted would require public meetings. I questioned that. He sort of, I mean, there are like 4 levels of opinions that you can get from the Ethics Commission, leading up to eventually a final opinion by the commission itself. But at the staff level, there are less formal sorts of processes. Anyway, he kicked it up to his supervisor. I spoke with both of them on the phone, and eventually they consulted the executive director of the agency, and they all seemed to agree that the charter as drafted would subject the audit committee to the public meetings law. I continue to disagree with that opinion. I think that we do not fit the definition of a governing body in the Oregon administrative rules, but the key difference, I think, appears to be that the Ethics Commission staff seems to feel that unless a body falls within the defined exceptions to the administrative rule, it is subject to the public meetings law. The administrative rule essentially says a public body which is a governing body, or a governing body of a public body, is subject to the public meetings law. And governing bodies to which the law applies include, and they list 2 things. One is decision-making bodies that have the authority to make a decision on behalf of a public body, or advisory bodies which provide advice to a governing body. My position has been we are neither of those. We do not make decisions for the commission or for the agency, and we do not advise the commission. We only inform the commission of the work that we've done as one of its committees. Our advice is provided to the chief audit executive, which our responsibility is basically to oversee the audit process, and we can advise him on improvements that he could make to the audit process. Audit recommendations come from the chief internal auditor and are recommendations to the executive director. However, as I said, my argument was we don't fall within those definitions of a governing body, either one of them. The commission staff seems to feel that that's irrelevant unless you fall within the second paragraph of the OAR, which says the following bodies are not subject to the law. You're subject to the law. And those bodies which are not subject to the law include primarily, I mean, the primary one we'd be looking at would be a body which is appointed by a public official and only advises that public official. So, for example, if the governor appoints an advisory group to advise her on, I don't know, how to maintain veterans cemeteries, that group would not necessarily be subject to the public meetings law. If the chief audit executive appointed his own audit committee to advise him on his audit processes, that would not be subject to the public meetings law. If the executive director appoints a committee to advise the executive director on whatever, and it could be the sorts of things that are subject to audits, that would not be subject to the public meetings law, but it has to be an appointment by a single official to advise a single official. So I think, while there are still avenues open to us to pursue opinions about on a revised charter that is in which we try to make clear that we're not advising a public body. One of the stumbling blocks may be that the audit committee, as currently defined in its charter, is a committee of the commission. So it doesn't in their minds fall within that exception where it's appointed by Scott to advise Scott, for example, because Scott doesn't have the appointment authority, even if our role is to advise him. So, that's what we're struggling with at the moment, and we're going to be seeking advice from the Chief Audit Executive Council, because to my knowledge, public defense is the only agency that has brought this question to the Ethics Commission. They've not ruled on it in regard to any other. Even staff have not given an opinion to any other audit committees in the state. And while we are different from most audit committees in being appointed by the commission rather than the executive director, I don't think we're unique. There are other audit committees in agencies which have a governing board or commission, like the commission we have. So I think there would probably be, if the Ethics Commission were to take this position in regard to audit committees generally, I suspect that there would probably be a move on the part of the CAE Council to seek legislative change to provide an exemption. They did that, I don't know, 12, 15 years ago in regard to the public records law, to provide an exemption from the public records law for audit work papers until an audit report had been released, so that those were protected public documents until the report was done. I suspect that the audit community would probably seek a similar exemption from the public meetings law if they're currently held to be subject to that law. So So that's kind of where things stand. I mean, our options are to make further revisions to the charter in hopes of satisfying the commission, pursuing legislative change, or accepting that our meetings are subject to the public meetings law and planning for executive session to protect any information that needs to be protected in the course of our meetings, which is certainly something that can be done. I mean, David's audit committee is subject to the public meetings law, and my understanding is that's what they do. So at the moment, I just wanted to update everyone on where things stand with that, and I guess invite discussion of this group as to whether they feel it's important to try to maintain private sessions if we can make appropriate changes to the charter to do that, or whether this group would prefer to kind of keep the current structure of the committee under its charter and simply meet in public and use executive sessions as required, as necessary. We'll ultimately probably be having the same sort of conversation with management and with the commission.
I'll just say I don't have enough. I'm not expert enough to understand what the best course would be, John. So I'd like to hear from others, but open meetings and executive sessions are done quite a little bit clunky. And I don't know what kind of issues we're going to get into where we want to have a more freewheeling discussion, we do have a change of executive director, so I don't know if the agency's position has changed or is modified or developed or evolved either. So I guess I'd like to know more from maybe even, David, what's his experience, or, John, yours as auditors, or Scott, Ken. So I'll support whatever this group decides is the best course of action. The one thing you didn't mention is we could just push it through maybe to the ethics commission level and have them make a more formal decision on this.
Yeah, that would take several months, but that's what I would consider to be the next step, because we've even though it hasn't been a formal letter from the executive director, it's essentially the issue's been discussed up to the executive director level. So I think if we wanted to pursue it, it would be with a request for a commission opinion, and that by the way, an opinion by the commission is the only thing which actually provides protection against a violation of the public meetings law. The opinions at the staff level are just advisory, but you're still taking the risk.
Yeah, well, I think they're pretty binding at this point on us.
Yeah.
So in this interim, but
yeah. So I mean, we certainly plan to continue to meet in public session until we have an opinion which allows us not to. I mean, one of the other things that provides protection, although it's a different level of protection, I mean, if the agency had counsel, which it used to, I mean, when the charter was first drafted, we consulted with the agency's general counsel and were advised that if we structured the audit committee to have only one commission member, that we would not be subject to the public meetings law. So, that I think provided some protection, because there is in the penalty provisions for violation of the law, there's protection if you're acting on the advice of counsel. So even if he was wrong in his opinion, and we were subject to the public meetings law, the ethics commission would not have imposed fines on us because we'd been operating with on his advice. The agency no longer has its own counsel, so I think since we've got an opinion from DOJ and from the Executives Commission, I don't think we have that kind of protection anymore, and we need to meet in public session until that's resolved. But I mean, David, I wonder if you could share with us your experience with holding public audit committee meetings, and whether you feel it impairs in any way the functioning of the audit committee, or whether it's just, as Rob says, makes things maybe clunky, but you can still do what you need to do.
Yeah, so I've been on both sides of the coin. So currently at PSU, our audit committee meetings are public meetings. I will say one of the difficulties is it mostly surrounds like new committee members. Even though we try to do outreach and education, just the concept of they might ask a question that is not appropriate for the public meeting section, but is more appropriate for executive session. And so you just have to pivot and say, hey, that's a discussion for executive session. They're like, great, let's adjourn to executive session. It's like, you can't do that. You have to give advance notice. And then another thing that new committee members struggle with is when you go to executive session, you can only talk about the topic that you adjourn to executive session for, and they'll want to talk about anything. And you have to remind them like, hey, you can only talk about this topic.
Yeah.
So as long as you have good outreach and education to your committee members, and everyone knows kind of the protocol for how the public meetings work and when executive session is appropriate and what needs to be communicated in advance, I think they're fine. I will say that, I mean, you have to be sensitive to some of the topics that are being discussed, and sensitive on how you're going to respond as the auditor to committee members' questions about weaknesses in controls or control gaps or non-compliance, because those should be talked about in executive session, in my professional opinion. Now, on the flip side, from my experience Oregon Department of Education's audit committee and HEC's audit committee, I'm pretty sure in both situations we did get a legal opinion, and the legal opinion was these are not subject to public meetings.
Oh, really?
Yes. And the rationale was because they don't have a quorum of commission members, and they're not voting on action items that impact the governance.
Do you remember whether that was an opinion from DOJ or from the ethics?
I believe it's from, yeah, the agency rep assigned from DOJ. So yeah, the general concept there for those two committees was it's advisory in nature. We're not approving anything for the agency as a whole, and it's just advising the audit function. So
yeah. I was the CA at education before you were on the committee, and our committee never met in public.
Right. Yeah. And yeah, Latham was your predecessor, and that's when
My successor.
So sorry. And that's when I was brought on. So yeah, we just continued that practice that you had established. Yep.
Well, Scott, I remember asking some time back if you could get charters from any agencies which do have a governing body. Like, I mean, Department of Education has the Board of Education as a governing body, right? Yeah. I know there are several others. I think Department of Transportation has a a governing body, the transportation board or something. It seems to me those are the key agencies for us in this conversation with the ethics commission. Is, you know, what is it, to look at what is it that distinguishes us from these others, or is it your opinion that all of these audit committees, and maybe even those of agencies that don't have governing commissions, are subject to the public meetings law? Because I mean, I doubt that OPDC alone would be able to make the kind of headway on a legislative exception that the entire state audit community could make. So we need to, you know, if we want to pursue that, we need to be able to identify how our situation is the same as all of theirs.
Agreed. And I have some of those audit committee charters. I can go back and look at that, but I agree. The part of the issue is, how are we different? Like you said,
Yeah.
and if we identify that, then we have some understanding of why, and can
Yeah.
bring that.
And it'd probably be a good idea to inquire of other CAEs, you know, for any legal opinions they've received, such as David described. If there is in fact a legal opinion at Department of Education and at other agencies, it would be great to have those when we talk with the commission or with DOJ.
I can reach out and do that.
Yeah.
I got a quick email from Deanna. She's trying to join via the Zoom. I let her know that it came from Mara. Mara, that's correct, right? You just sent out the Zoom meeting about a week ago, I think.
Yes, each person got their own link.
Okay. All right. So she should have that.
Yeah, I can resend it to her so it's at the top of her inbox.
If you can, please. I know she's busy. And if she could join us, then we could potentially approve the meeting minutes from last time.
Right. Okay.
I need to leave in 4 minutes for another meeting, so I'll just put that out there.
Okay.
Thank you.
Any questions in regard to the public meetings law issue? We'll be reporting back at the next meeting, maybe even before, if we can get some resolution.
I can review the 2024 audit plan next time if you like, because it'll be part of a discussion on risk assessment and probably the audit plan going forward. Not a problem if you wanted to do a roundtable.
Okay. All right. Anybody have any issues or concerns they'd like to raise?
Deanna just joined us from her car, looks like.
Hi, Deanna. Welcome.
You're muted, Deanna, it looks like.
Can you hear us, Deanna?
I can. I'm sorry.
Yeah. Okay. So first, I guess I'd like to introduce you to David Terry. He's a new member of our committee. He's the chief executive auditor at Portland State University, and invite you to introduce yourself to him.
Hi, David. There's actually a legendary criminal defense attorney from Southern Oregon who's also named David Terry. So I was like, wait, what? It's very confused. He didn't look like the person I knew. My name is Deanna Horn. I am a career public defender. I've done both adult and juvenile stuff since June of 2003, where I first went to work for Metropolitan Public Defender's Office, which is a nonprofit there in Portland. And I now have my own practice where I do exclusively juvenile defense in Clackamas County. So hi, and I do apologize for being late. When new cases come in on the juvenile docket in Clackamas County, they come in at 1:30, and so I was assigned to take a mother in a juvenile dependency case today. So that's where I've been.
Oh, glad you could make it. The one item we need a quorum for is to approve. I'm sorry. What was that? Oh, so the one item that we need a quorum for, and I'd like to get taken care of before Kim has to leave, is approval of the minutes of the last meeting. Does anyone have any edits or comments on those minutes, or can we approve those? We're going to let you vote, David, even though you weren't there. All right,
I'll make a motion to approve.
Second. So
all
Kim
in
for the
favor?
second.
I
All right, minutes are approved. And that takes us back to the roundtable. We were asking if anyone had any issues to raise in the roundtable. Seeing none, I think we can adjourn on time.
Yeah.
Thank you all for coming. Thanks
Thank
for
you.
joining us, David.
All right. Thank you
Thank you all.
guys.
Thank you, Ken.